15%. Is he hemorrhaging cash? Can he declare bankruptcy? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Not without losing everything, Kenji said. His personal guarantee on the Sullivan Holdings loans means if the LLC defaults, they can come after his personal assets. His houses, his cars, his art collection, and there's a clause in his partnership agreement that penalizes him severely for a personal bankruptcy. It's a trap by design. A trap? Of course it was. Richard Sullivan hadn't just built an empire. He'd built a cage for himself. Send me the full report, I said. And Kenji, find out who those lenders are, the actual people behind the LLCs. I have a feeling they aren't who they seem to be. I hung up and immediately called Ray. He was already at his office, a war room of legal pads and files. Kenji just confirmed it, I said without preamble. Richard is buried. $20 million in personal debt, leveraged up to his eyeballs. Ray let out a low whistle. That explains the wedding bill. He was trying to hide a line item to keep his creditors from calling in his debts. If they knew he was dropping tens of thousands on a party, they'd view him as unstable, which is exactly why he needs this to go away quietly. Exactly, I mused. He needs Grayson to pay the bill to cover his tracks. And when Grayson couldn't, they came after me. This changes things, Ray said thoughtfully. If Richard is facing financial collapse, he's more likely to cave. He'll pressure Grayson to settle to avoid a public spectacle that could trigger a default on his loans. Exactly, I said. So we use that in the meeting with Gates. We don't just threaten Grayson, we threaten the entire Sullivan empire. We make it clear that if this goes to trial, Richard's financial house of cards comes crashing down. Sounds like a plan, Ray said. I'll be there at 1:30. We walk in together. I spent the next few hours preparing my opening arguments. I wasn't just going to sit there and listen to Gates grandstand. I was going to dictate the terms of the conversation. I printed copies of the key documents, the wire transfer receipts, the photo of the bracelet, the transcript of the video call, and most importantly, a summary of Kenji's financial report on Richard. I organized them into a sleek black leather binder, a gift from Grayson for our 10th anniversary, now repurposed as the tool of his ruin. At 1:15 p.m., I left the hotel. The midtown air was thick with humidity, a sharp contrast to the crisp, air-conditioned chill of my suite. I walked the 10 blocks to Gates & Associates, my heels clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. It wasn't nervousness. It was pure focus. Gates's office was on the 15th floor of a Madison Avenue high-rise. All polished wood, modern art, and views that cost more per month than my Chicago rent. Her assistant, a severe-looking woman with a bun so tight it looked painful, escorted us to the conference room. Teresa Gates was already there, sitting at the head of a long mahogany table. She was a formidable presence, tall and angular, with a sharp gray bob and a suit that probably cost more than my car. She didn't stand to greet us. She just tilted her head slightly, her eyes evaluating me with the cold calculus of a surgeon. "Mr. Sterling, Ms. Black," she said, her voice as smooth as ever. "Please, have a seat." Ray and I sat across from her. There was no one else in the room. No junior associates, no paralegals. This was a private summit. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries," Gates began, interlacing her fingers on the table. "My client is prepared to offer a settlement. He will agree to a division of assets as outlined in the prenuptial agreement with a modest increase in alimony. In exchange, Miss Black agrees to drop all allegations of infidelity and financial misconduct and signs a mutual non-disparagement agreement." I smiled. It was a practiced, empty gesture. "That's generous, Miss Gates, truly. But that's not why we're here." Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me. We aren't here to negotiate a settlement based on the prenup," I said, opening my binder and sliding the first document across the table. It was the summary of Richard's financial exposure. "We are here to discuss the dissolution of the marriage and the division of marital assets, which, thanks to your client's actions, are now significantly more complex." Gates glanced at the paper, her expression unreadable, then looked at Ray. "Is this some kind of joke? This is about Richard Sullivan, not Grayson." "Actually," Ray said, his voice calm and steady, "it has everything to do with Grayson. Grayson is the heir apparent to the Sullivan empire. If that empire collapses under a mountain of debt and fraud investigations, what is Grayson's net worth? What is his future earning potential? And more importantly, what does that do to his ability to pay the legal fees you are currently racking up?" Gates's jaw tightened. She knew we were right. I slid another document across the table, the transcript of the video call. "And then there's this, a candid conversation between your client and his companion. It's quite illuminating, especially the part where he admits to financial distress and calls her a gold digger. I'm sure a jury would find it charming." Gates didn't touch the paper. She just stared at it, her knuckles white. I placed the final document on top of the pile, the motion to freeze assets. "And finally this, which we will file with the court tomorrow morning if we don't reach a satisfactory resolution today. We have proof of a pattern of dissipation of marital assets, Ms. Gates. We will freeze every account, every property, every investment vehicle tied to Grayson Sullivan. He won't be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone pay your retainer." For the first time since we sat down, Teresa Gates looked uncertain. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes darting between Ray and me. The icy composure was cracking. "My client does not want this to go to trial," she said, losing some of her earlier swagger. "He wants this over." "So do I," said, leaning forward, "which is why I'm offering the solution. Grayson agrees to a full and unconditional waiver of the prenup. We split the marital assets 50-50, and he pays my legal fees. In exchange, I agree not to press criminal charges against him or his father." Gates laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "You can't be serious. An equal split? He'll be left with nothing." "He'll be left with his life," I countered, "and his freedom. Because if this goes to trial, Miss Gates, I won't just present this evidence in civil court. I'll hand it over to the district attorney, the SEC, and the IRS. Your client will face criminal charges. Is that the outcome you want for him?" The room fell silent. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. Gates stared at me for a long, long time. Then slowly she gathered the papers and stacked them neatly. "I need to speak with my client." "Of course," Ray said, standing up. "We'll be in the hallway." We stepped out of the conference room, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind us. Ray turned to me, a grin spreading across his face. That was brutal. And magnificent. "I meant every word," I said, the adrenaline finally starting to recede, leaving behind a deep exhaustion. "He has until the end of the day." We didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, Gates emerged. Her face was a mask of professional detachment, but her eyes were cold. She had lost this round. "He will accept your terms," she said, her voice dry. "With one addition. The non-disparagement agreement is non-negotiable." I smiled. Done. We shook hands. The deal was sealed. While we walked out of the building and into the bustling street, the midday sun felt different, warmer, brighter. The war wasn't over. There would be battles over the details, the wording of the final decree, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. I looked up at the towering skyscrapers, the glass and steel that symbolized the world I was about to re-enter. I was no longer an outsider looking in. I was a player, a force to be reckoned with. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Think you won. You have no idea what's coming." I smiled and blocked the number. Let them threaten. Let them posture. It was all they had left. I was walking away with my dignity, my freedom, and my future. And they were left with a mountain of debt, a crumbling empire, and a lifetime of regret. I made the first move. They made the last. And it was checkmate. The deal was sealed, but the war wasn't over. It was just entering a new, more ruthless phase. The next few hours were a whirlwind of legal documents, conference calls, and strategic maneuvering. Ray and his team worked non-stop, drafting the settlement agreement with the precision of technicians defusing a bomb. One wrong word, one ambiguous clause, and the whole thing could blow up in our faces. I, meanwhile, became a ghost. I stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. I deactivated my social media accounts. I even had the hotel forward calls to my room directly to voicemail. My only communication was with Ray and Kenji. I operated in the shadows, a general directing her troops from a secure bunker. The terms of the settlement were brutal for Grayson, exactly as I intended. The prenup was rendered null and void. The marital assets, which now included the Soho penthouse, a significant portion of the profits from his startup, and several investment accounts would be split equally. He was also responsible for covering my legal fees, a sum that had already climbed into the six figures. And, as an exquisite final touch, he had to personally guarantee the $50,000 wedding invoice, removing my name from the contract entirely. The only concession I made was the non-disparagement agreement. I wouldn't badmouth him publicly, and he wouldn't badmouth me. It was a small price to pay for the financial devastation I was about to unleash. Besides, the best revenge isn't a loud scream. It's the quiet, satisfied smile you wear when your enemy realizes they've lost. On the morning of the third day, Ray called me with an update. "He signed it," he said, the exhaustion evident in his voice. "Just a few minutes ago. Teresa Gates is drafting the final paperwork for the judge's signature." A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful, it made my knees weak. I collapsed into the nearest chair, my hand pressed tightly against my chest. It was over. The legal battle was won. "And Richard?" I asked. "Strangely quiet," Ray said. "I think the news about his financial troubles scared him more than anything else. He's backing off. He knows if he pushes, we expose everything." "Good," I said. "Then now it's just Grayson." "Just Grayson," Ray confirmed. "And he's not taking it well." Gates said he was emotional. She practically had to hold his hand to get him to sign. I smiled. Emotional. That was one way to put it. The final decree was signed by the judge that afternoon. It was a done deal. Grayson Sullivan was officially a divorced man walking away with half of what he brought into the marriage, half of his future, and half of his pride. I expected him to disappear, to crawl back into his world of startups and socialites, licking his wounds and planning his next move. I expected a text, maybe a cruel email, but nothing more. I was wrong. He came to the hotel. I was in the lobby, checking out my few belongings packed into a single suitcase. I had decided to move into a temporary loft in Dumbo, Brooklyn, a place I'd found online that screamed, independent, successful woman. Exactly the image I wanted to project. That's when I saw him. He was standing by the revolving doors, His arms crossed, his jaw tight. He looked wrecked. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair a mess, and his expensive suit was wrinkled like he'd slept in it. He looked older, smaller. The Grayson Sullivan I had first met, the confident, charismatic investor, was gone. In his place was a defeated, bitter man. Our eyes met across the wide marble lobby. He pushed through the doors and marched toward me with a purpose that made my stomach tighten. "Eleanor," he said, his voice raspy, "we need to talk." "I think we're done talking, Grayson," I said, keeping my voice calm and level. I nodded to the bellhop holding my luggage. "I'm checking out." "You can't do this," he hissed, grabbing my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "You can't just abandon us." Gently but firmly, I peeled his hand away. "There is no us, Grayson. There hasn't been for a long time. The judge just signed the papers. We are legally strangers." "This is insane!" he yelled, drawing the attention of the concierge and a few lingering guests. "You're throwing away 12 years of marriage over a stupid wedding bill and a midlife crisis." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the tension. "A midlife crisis. That's what you're calling it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're having a very public meltdown because your wife finally grew a spine." He lunged at me again, but this time the bellhop intervened, placing a protective hand on my suitcase. "Sir, is there a problem?" Grayson glared at the young man, then turned his fury back to me. "You think you won? You think this settlement makes you the winner? You won a Pyrrhic victory, Eleanor. You destroyed the family. You embarrassed my father. You alienated everyone who cares about us." "Us," I repeated, dropping my voice to a whisper. "There is no us, Grayson. There hasn't been for years. You made sure of that when you chose your father's approval over your wife's love, when you chose that girl over your marriage." "Her name is Iris," he roared, his face turning purple. "And she supports me more in one day than you did in 12 years. I smiled, a cold, hard smile that I knew would cut him to the bone. "Does she support you, or is she just ambitious? Because from where I'm standing, she looks more interested in your money than your heart. And speaking of money," I pulled out my phone, my finger hovering over a single button. "I wanted to show you one last thing before I go. A little souvenir from our marriage." I hit play. The video from the Soho penthouse, Grayson and Iris arguing, began to play. The audio wasn't perfect, but his voice was unmistakable. "You're nothing but a gold digger anyway. You're lucky I even look at you." The color drained from his face. He stared at my phone, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. How did you get that?" he stammered. "I have my methods," I said, slipping the phone back into my pocket. "And don't worry, I haven't shared it yet. But if you ever come near me again, if you ever try to harass me or drag my name through the mud, that video goes public, right alongside the financial records from the IRS report. Are we understood?" He just stared at me, his eyes wide with a mix of hatred and terror. I turned to the bellhop. "I'm ready." As I walked past Grayson, I paused for a second. I leaned in just close enough so only he could hear. "The wedding bill is paid, by the way," I murmured. "It came out of your half of the settlement. Consider it a parting gift from your wife. Goodbye, Grayson." I walked out of the hotel and into the bright, unforgiving light of a New York afternoon. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel his eyes on me, burning into my back like a brand. The war was over. The battle for my future had just begun. And as I slid into the back seat of the cab that would take me to my new life, I allowed myself a single triumphant thought. I had won. And the best part was, he had no one to blame but himself. The cab ride to my new loft in Dumbo was a surreal experience. I looked out the window at the familiar streets of New York, seeing them with fresh eyes. This wasn't the city I visited as a tourist or flew into as the pretty wife on her husband's arm. This was my city now. A city of opportunity, of sharp edges, of people who wouldn't bat an eye if you cried on the subway because they were too busy fighting their own battles. I liked that. I liked the anonymity, the meritocracy. My phone buzzed. A text from Ray. Settlement recorded. Grayson just left my office. He looked like he got hit by a bus. You were right. He won't be a problem anymore. I smiled and replied with a single word. Good. Then I silenced my phone and dropped it into my purse. I didn't want any more distractions. I had a new home to set up, a new life to build, and a new career to launch. The past was dead, buried under the weight of legal documents and a final, decisive victory. The apartment was everything I had hoped for. It was a top-floor loft with space-exposed brick polished concrete floors and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the East River and the Manhattan skyline. It was unfurnished, which suited me perfectly. I wanted to fill it with pieces I chose, things that represented me, not us. During the following week, that's exactly what I did. I scoured design studios and antique markets, curating a modern, comfortable, and unapologetically expensive collection of furniture. A sleek gray sectional sofa, a vintage Eames lounge chair, a dining table made of reclaimed walnut. I hired a contractor to install a state-of-the-art home office, complete with a massive monitor, a top-tier printer, and custom floor-to-ceiling shelving. It was my sanctuary, my fortress, and it was perfect. I also reactivated my New York State bar license. It was a simple process, a few forms and a fee, but it felt monumental. I was no longer Eleanor Sullivan, ex-wife. I was Eleanor Black, attorney at law. I reached out to a few former colleagues from Sterling and Pierce, and within days, I had several offers for freelance legal consulting. It wasn't a partner track position, no, but it was a start. It was income. It was independence. One afternoon, about a week after moving in, I was at a coffee shop near my apartment reviewing a contract for a tech startup when I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. The distinct sensation of being watched. I looked up from my laptop and my blood ran cold. Across the street, standing in the shadow of a doorway, was Iris. She looked different. The carefully constructed facade of the other woman was gone, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated anxiety. Her hair was messy, her clothes wrinkled, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She was staring at me with an almost terrifying intensity. I held her gaze for a long moment. Then, I calmly closed my laptop and stood up. I crossed the street, my heels clicking against the pavement, and stopped a few feet away from her. "Can I help you, Iris?" I asked, my voice cold and distant. She flinched as if my voice had been a physical blow. "I need to talk to you," she stammered, her eyes darting around nervously. "It's about Grayson." "I don't talk about Grayson," I said, making a move to walk past her. "We have nothing left to say to each other." "Please," she cried, grabbing my arm. Her grip was desperate. "You have to help me. He's lost his mind." I stopped and looked back at her. I let a flicker of curiosity show on my face. "Lost his what?" "Everything," she hissed, her eyes filling with tears. "The money, the investors, his mind. He hasn't stopped drinking since the divorce was finalized. He's talking about suicide. He says it's all your fault. I gently removed her hand from my arm. Suicide. That's what he's telling you. How convenient. It's true, she insisted. He's spiraling, and I'm trapped in the middle of it. He won't let me leave. He says if I leave, he'll kill himself. I studied her for a moment. She was shaking, her eyes wide, with a mix of fear and resentment. Either she was a brilliant actress, or she was genuinely terrified. And if she was terrified, it meant Grayson was more dangerous than I had thought. But I wasn't her savior. I wasn't her therapist. I was the woman she had helped destroy. I'm sorry to hear that, Iris, I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. But that's between you and Grayson. It's not my problem anymore. It is your problem, she shrieked, drawing the attention of a passing couple. You did this to him! You ruined him! I smiled, a cold, hard smile that I knew would cut her to the bone. No, Iris. I just held up a mirror to him. He didn't like what he saw, so he broke it. Don't blame me for the consequences of his own actions. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there on the Brooklyn street sobbing. But her words stayed with me. Grayson was spiraling, talking about suicide. It was a classic tactic of the guilty and desperate, a way to manipulate, to control, to elicit pity. And if he was manipulating Iris, who else was he trying to manipulate? The court? The media? I pulled out my phone and dialed Ray's number. Ray, I said when he answered. It's Eleanor. I just had a visit from Iris. I recounted the encounter, her claims about Grayson's instability, and his threats of suicide. Damn it, Ray said, his voice grim. I was hoping he'd just fade away. This complicates things. He's trying to play the victim, I said, painting me as the villain who drove him to despair. We need to be ready for that. We are, Ray assured me. I'll have our investigator look into it. See if there's any truth to his threats. But Eleanor, be careful. A man like Grayson, when he feels he has nothing left to lose, is capable of anything. I hung up the phone, a knot of unease forming in my gut. Ray was right. I had won the legal battle, but the war wasn't over. It had entered a new, more dangerous phase. I looked up at my new building, the glass and steel that housed my new life. It was a fortress. But would it be strong enough? I pushed the thought away. I had survived Richard. I had survived Grayson. I would survive this. I was Eleanor Black, and I was not afraid. I walked into my building, the doorman holding the door for me with a polite nod. I rode the elevator up to the top floor, the silence a welcome balm after the chaos of the street. As I unlocked the door and stepped into my empty, pristine apartment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to live in fear. I wasn't going to let Grayson's instability dictate my life. I was going to fight back. I walked over to my desk, opened my laptop, and started typing. I was drafting a new document, one that would preempt any attempt by Grayson to manipulate the narrative. It was a cease and desist notice, not for him, but for the media. It stated in no uncertain terms that any false or defamatory statements made about me by Grayson Sullivan or his associates would be met with swift and forceful legal action. I wouldn't be a victim. I would be a brick wall. I printed the letter and signed it with a decisive stroke. Then I scanned it and emailed it to every major media outlet in New York. Let him try to play the victim. I was ready for him. The game had just changed, and I intended to win. The cease and desist notice was like a warning shot across the bow. It was professional, impersonal, and absolutely devastating in its implications. I wasn't just defending myself. I was going on the offensive. And the media smelling blood in the water started circling. The first story broke 2 days later. It was a small piece in page 6, buried in the society pages. Sullivan divorce takes dark turn. Ex-wife issues gag order. It quoted sources close to the matter who described my letter as aggressive and unnecessary. But the piece also noted that Grayson Sullivan had been conspicuously silent since the divorce was finalized, fueling speculation about his mental and financial state. Then came the real blow. It was a Wednesday morning. I was in my home office reviewing a complex licensing agreement for a software company when the news alert popped up on my screen. Breaking. Tech entrepreneur Grayson Sullivan faces fraud allegations amid ongoing family dispute. My heart stopped. I clicked the link. The story, published by a major business magazine, was a bombshell. It detailed the allegations of financial misconduct that had been circulating in legal circles, tying them directly to Grayson's now-defunct startup, Ether Technologies. The article alleged that Grayson had misrepresented the company's user acquisition costs to investors, artificially inflating the valuation before its sale. The source of the leak was anonymous, but the details were too specific to be anything other than an inside job. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. I hadn't done this. I hadn't spoken to the press. I hadn't leaked a single document, which meant someone else had. Someone who wanted to see Grayson burn just as much as I did. Richard. No. Richard was too busy protecting his own skin. He wouldn't risk bringing this kind of scrutiny to the family name. That left only one other person. Iris. It made sense. She was desperate, cornered, and looking for a way out. Turning on Grayson was her only play, and she had chosen the arena where he was most vulnerable: his professional reputation. I grabbed my phone and dialed Ray's number. "Did you see it?" he asked before I could even say hello. "I saw it," I said, my voice tight. "It wasn't us." "I know," he said, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "But it helps our case immensely. The SEC is going to have to open an investigation now. And with that level of scrutiny, any hope he had of a soft landing is gone." He was right. This changed everything. Grayson wasn't just a divorcee with a drinking problem anymore. He was a potential fraudster facing federal charges. His stock, both personal and professional, had just plummeted. During the next 24 hours, the story exploded. Major newspapers and news networks picked it up. The name Grayson was trending on Twitter. His LinkedIn profile was flooded with comments and messages. His investors, the ones he had lied to, issued statements of deep concern, and Grayson remained silent. Completely silent. His social media went dark. His phone went straight to voicemail. He was a ghost. Until he wasn't. He showed up at my building at 9 p.m. I knew he was there before the doorman even called me. I could feel it. A malignant presence radiating up from the street. "Ms. Black," the doorman's voice crackled through the intercom, "there's a gentleman here to see you. He says it's urgent." I checked the security camera feed on my tablet. There he was. Grayson looked like a shadow of his former self. Gaunt, disheveled, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He was pacing back and forth in front of the building, muttering to himself. "Ignore him," I said. "And if he causes trouble, call the police." "Yes, ma'am." I turned off the intercom and walked to my window, looking down. He was staring up at my building, his face a mask of anguish and rage. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed. I could see him screaming into the device, his face twisted in fury. My own phone rang a second later. Unknown number. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. Then a text came through. It was you. You. I'm going to destroy you. I swear to God, I'm going to annihilate you. I smiled and blocked the number. Let him scream. Let him threaten. It was the sound of a drowning man. The next morning, the story took another turn. The New York Post published a follow-up piece, this time featuring a bombshell photo. It was Grayson stumbling out of a Lower East Side bar, his arm slung around a woman who was definitively not Iris. The caption read, "Sullivan's latest meltdown, from fraud allegations to bar brawls." The woman in the photo was young, blonde, and strangely familiar. I did a reverse image search and found her in seconds. Her name was something generic, and she was a struggling actress who had been posting photos with Grayson on her Instagram for months, long before the divorce was even finalized. He hadn't just cheated on me with Iris. He'd been living a double, triple, quadruple life. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. I forwarded the photo to Ray. His reply was concise. Game over. He's done. Ray was right. This was the final nail in the coffin. The prenup was voided, the settlement agreement was final, and now his own actions were destroying his reputation beyond repair. There was nothing left to fight for, nothing left to win, except, maybe, one last thing. That afternoon, I received a formal letter from Teresa Gates's office. It was a request for a final good faith settlement conference to discuss the disposition of the remaining marital assets. It was a formality, a last desperate attempt by Grayson to salvage something from the wreckage. I agreed to the meeting, not because I believed there was anything left to negotiate, but because I wanted to see him one last time. I wanted to look him in the eye and see the man he had become. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. I spent the days leading up to it preparing not my legal arguments, but my exit strategy. I finalized my plans to move back to Chicago. My consulting work was drying up. The novelty of my victory was fading. It was time to go home, to rebuild my life in a place where the air didn't smell like ambition and betrayal. On the day of the meeting, I wore my armor, the same charcoal gray suit from the first meeting with Gates. I arrived at her office with Ray by my side. Grayson was already there. He looked worse than he had on the street. He was jittery, his hands shaking, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. He couldn't meet my gaze. Gates, to her credit, looked exhausted. This case had taken a toll on her too. She was no longer the icy, confident opponent she had been. She was just a lawyer trying to clean up the mess her client had made. The meeting was a farce. Grayson muttered a series of nonsensical arguments, blaming everyone but himself for his situation. He accused me of leaking the story to the Post. He accused Iris of stealing from him. He even accused his own father of sabotaging him. He was unhinged. Finally, I'd had enough. I stood up, signaling the end of the charade. "Miss Gates," I said, my voice cutting through the fog of Grayson's rambling, "it's clear your client is in no condition to participate in productive negotiations. We're done here." "Eleanor, wait!" Grayson yelled, jumping out of his chair. "You can't do this. You haven't heard my proposal." "I've heard enough," I said, gathering my papers. "Your proposal, such as it is noted and rejected. Goodbye, Grayson." I turned and walked toward the door. He lunged at me, his hand reaching out to grab my arm. "No," he screamed. "You're not walking away. You're not taking everything from me." Ray stepped in, his large frame easily blocking Grayson's path. "That's enough, Mr. Sullivan. Sit down." Grayson stumbled backward, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "I'll make you pay for this," he hissed. "I swear to God, I'll make you pay." I smiled, a cold, hard smile that I knew would haunt him. "You already have, Grayson. You already have." I walked out of that office for the last time, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The war was over. Grayson Sullivan was a broken man, and I, Eleanor Black, was finally free. I stepped out of the building and into the bright, unforgiving light of a New York afternoon. The air was crisp, the sky was blue, and the future was mine. I hailed a cab and gave the driver my new address. It was time to go home. The silence in my Dumbo loft was a living thing. It had been 3 days since the disastrous meeting with Grayson and Teresa Gates. 3 days of no news, no threats, no drunken voicemails. Just the low hum of the city outside my windows and the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. It was the silence of a battlefield after the guns had gone quiet. A deceptive calm that suggested the war was truly over. I was packing. Not unpacking as one would in a new home, but packing. My consulting work had run its course. The well of sympathy and morbid interest in the New York legal world had dried up. The story of the scorned wife who took down her cheating husband was old news. It was time to go home. I had booked a flight back to Chicago for the following week. My one-way ticket sat on the kitchen counter, a tangible symbol of my escape. I was packing my books into boxes, the smell of old paper and ink a comfort, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with a local New York area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something, a shiver of unease, a sixth sense honed by months of paranoia, made me answer. "Hello, Eleanor." The voice was female, breathy, and unfamiliar. "It's Martha, Martha Sullivan." I froze, a half-filled cardboard box in my hands. Martha, Grayson's younger sister, the bride, the one who had sent me that pathetic, "You're ruining my wedding" text weeks ago. I hadn't heard from her since. "Martha," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "This is a surprise." "Please," she gasped, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "You have to help me. It's Dad." My blood ran cold. "What's wrong with your father?" "He had a heart attack last night. He's at Mount Sinai. He's alive, but it's bad, Eleanor. Really bad." I sank into the nearest chair, the phone pressed tightly to my ear. Richard Sullivan, the patriarch. The man who had started this entire chain of events with his cruel rejection in the wedding driveway. He was dying. "Why are you calling me, Martha?" I asked, my mind racing. This was a trap. It had to be a ruse to get me to the hospital, to set an ambush, to force some kind of reconciliation. "Because you're the only one who can fix this," she sobbed, grief and desperation spilling over. "The doctors say he needs immediate surgery. It's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, money he doesn't have. The IRS is freezing his assets. The banks are foreclosing on his loans. He's going to lose everything. The house, the business, everything. And if he loses the business, he loses his health insurance, and he can't pay for the surgery. Please, Eleanor, I'm begging you. You have to talk to him." The pieces clicked together with a sickening snap. Richard's financial empire was crumbling. The IRS audit, the predatory loans, the public fallout from the divorce. It had all been too much. His heart attack wasn't just a medical event. It was the physical manifestation of a life built on lies and greed, finally collapsing in on itself. I don't understand, Martha, I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind inside me. Why would I help him after everything he did? Because he's my dad, she cried, her desperation raw. And whether you like it or not, he's still your father-in-law. And if he dies, the family is done. Grayson will be ruined. I will be destroyed. Please, Eleanor, just come to the hospital. Talk to him. That's all I'm asking. I closed my eyes. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Pity for a man who had built his life on a foundation of sand. Satisfaction that justice in its own twisted way was finally being served. And beneath it all, a cold, hard core of resolve. This wasn't my fight anymore. I'll come to the hospital, I finally said. Thank you, Martha whispered, a flood of relieved sobs breaking over the line. Thank you so much. We're in the cardiology wing, 4th floor. Please hurry. I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long moment. Then I stood up, walked to my closet, and pulled out a black dress. It was a somber, elegant piece. The one I had bought for the funeral I knew was coming. I just hadn't expected it to be Richard's. Mount Sinai was a hive of fluorescent-lit anxiety. The antiseptic smell of sickness was a physical presence. I found the cardiology wing and walked down the sterile hallway, my low heels echoing against the linoleum. Room 704 was at the end of the hall. I could hear voices before I even reached it. Martha's high-pitched and frantic, and another, lower, familiar one, Grayson. I stopped outside the door, taking a deep breath before pushing it open and stepping inside. The room was a portrait of grief and resentment. Richard was propped up in the hospital bed, looking small and frail under the white sheets, a maze of tubes and wires trailing from his body to various machines. His face was gray, his eyes sunken. He looked every one of his 68 years. Martha sat by his bed, dabbing her eyes with the tissue, and Grayson stood by the window, staring out at the city with a dark, brooding expression. Everyone turned to look at me when I walked in. Eleanor, Martha whispered, her voice cracking. Thank you for coming. Richard's eyes met mine. There was no recognition in them, no plea for forgiveness, just a cold, hard assessment. Even on his deathbed, he was trying to maintain control. Grayson didn't say a word. He just glared at me, his jaw tight with undisguised hatred. I came as soon as I heard, I said, my voice calm and professional. I walked over to the bed, avoiding Grayson's gaze. Richard, I'm sorry to see you like this. He tried to speak, but a coughing fit racked him, shuddering through his frail body. Martha stood up to help him, but he waved her away, his eyes never leaving mine. When the coughing subsided, he managed to croak out a single word. Money. It was a demand, not a request. I know about the money, Richard, I said, keeping my voice low. I know about the IRS. I know about the loans. I know you're facing foreclosure on the house and bankruptcy for the business. He closed his eyes, and the single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. It was the closest thing to a surrender I would ever get from him. I can help you, I said. Grayson and Martha gasped. I held up a hand to silence them. But not the way you think. I turned to Grayson, who was looking at me with a mix of hope and suspicion. The money for the surgery, the money to keep the house, it won't come from me, I stated, my voice ringing with finality. It will come from the sale of the East Hampton estate. The East Hampton estate? Grayson stammered. It's worth millions. You can't. I can. I cut him off, pulling a folded document from my purse. And I will. Because it's the only asset not tied up in family trusts or failing LLCs. It's in Richard's personal name. And, according to the terms of our divorce settlement, based on the invalidated prenup, that property is now part of the marital estate, which was split equally. My half of the proceeds will more than cover your father's medical expenses and the outstanding debts on the house. I tossed the document onto the bed, where it landed with a soft thud. It was the final divorce decree, with the section detailing the division of assets highlighted in yellow. "You'd do that?" Martha whispered, her eyes wide in disbelief. "I'm not doing it for you," I said, my gaze sweeping over Martha, Richard, and finally Grayson. "I'm doing it on principle. A debt is a debt, and this family owes me a hell of a lot. This is how you're going to pay it." Richard's eyes opened weakly. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since I'd walked in. There was no gratitude there, just a cold, hard acceptance. He knew he had lost. He knew his empire was crumbling. And he knew I was the one holding the wrecking ball. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I turned to leave, but Grayson's voice stopped me. "Eleanor, wait." I looked back. He looked smaller than ever, his bravado stripped away, leaving only a hollow, bitter man. "Are you really going to go through with this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Are you going to sell the house? Are you going to take everything?" "I'm not taking everything, Grayson," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "I'm taking what's mine, and in the process, I'm saving the life of the man who tried to destroy me. If that's not a victory, I don't know what is." I walked out of that hospital room, leaving the ghosts of my past behind. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The war was over. The final casualty had just been accounted for. And I, Eleanor Black, was finally, truly free. I stepped out of the hospital and into the bright, unforgiving light of a New York afternoon. My flight to Chicago left in 3 days. It was time to go home. The silence of my loft felt different now. It wasn't the tense, expectant silence of a battlefield before the storm. It was the hollow silence of a graveyard. Richard Sullivan was still alive, but the man I had known, the real estate titan, the arrogant patriarch, had died in that hospital bed. What remained was a husk, kept alive by machines and morphine, waiting for the inevitable. I spent the next 2 days in a state of numb productivity. I finalized my flight plans, confirming my one-way ticket to O'Hare. I managed the sale of the East Hampton property, signing the paperwork electronically, and wiring my half of the proceeds into a special account I'd set up for Richard's medical expenses. I didn't do it for him. I did it for me. It was the final act of separation, a way to ensure the last tie binding me to that family was severed with a clean, surgical cut. On my last night in New York, I received a single text message. It was from an unknown number, but I knew who it was. "He's gone." 11:47 p.m. He went late. There was no name, no sentiment, just a timestamp and a curse. Classic Grayson. Even in death, he couldn't muster an ounce of genuine human emotion. He was a creature of spite to the bitter end. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The city was still asleep. The only sounds were the distant rumble of a garbage truck and the lonely wail of a siren. I dressed in comfortable clothes, jeans, a black sweater, boots, and brewed one last cup of coffee in my pristine, empty kitchen. I took one last look around the loft. The furniture I'd chosen so carefully was gone, sold or donated. The walls were bare. The space was clean, sterile, and ready for its next occupant. Just like me. My cab arrived at 6 a.m. sharp. The driver, a taciturn man, loaded my single suitcase into the trunk without a word. We drove through the waking city, the streets slowly filling with the morning hustle. I watched the familiar landmarks slide by. The Empire State Building, Washington Square Park, the gleaming skyscrapers of Midtown, each one a monument to a life I was leaving behind. At JFK, I checked my bag and breezed through security. The airport was a chaotic symphony of farewells and homecomings, a constant flow of people arriving and departing. I found my gate, B32, and sat down to wait. My American Airlines flight was scheduled to take off at 10:05 a.m., a direct flight to Chicago. It wasn't a long trip, maybe 2.5 hours, but I was looking forward to it. I was looking forward to the vast expanse of the Midwest, the literal and figurative distance it would put between me and my past. I was boarding with the first group of passengers when my phone, which I'd turned back on, buzzed relentlessly in my pocket. I ignored it, keeping it on silent as I walked down the jet bridge and into the belly of the plane. I found my seat, a window spot in premium economy, and stowed my carry-on in the overhead bin. I settled in the hum of the plane's engines, acting as a comforting white noise. As the plane pushed back from the gate, I took one last look at the city through the small, scratched window. The sun was rising over the horizon, painting the skyscrapers in shades of pink and gold. It was a beautiful sight, a fitting final glimpse. And then we were in the air. The city shrank below us, turning into a miniature model of tiny buildings and tiny streets. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes, and let myself drift. I didn't think about Grayson. I didn't think about Richard. I didn't think about the money, or the legal battles, or the years of humiliation. I thought about the future. I thought about the firm I'd be joining in Chicago, the cases I'd take on, the life I'd build for myself, brick by brick, with care. I was Eleanor Black, and I was finally going home, for real. The plane leveled off, and the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming us aboard and announcing our cruising altitude. I opened my eyes, looked out the window, and saw nothing but a sea of clouds stretching out to the horizon. It was a blank canvas, and I intended to make the most of it. A flight attendant came by with the beverage cart. I ordered a glass of sparkling water with lime. As she handed it to me, she smiled. "Heading home?" "Yes," I said, taking a sip of the crisp, bubbly liquid. "Heading to Chicago." I raised my glass toward the empty seat beside me, a silent toast to the woman I had been, the woman I had become, and the woman I was yet to be. The journey was just beginning, and this time, I was flying solo. 6 months later, the air in Chicago was different. Crisp, fresh, tinged with the smell of Lake Michigan and roasted nuts from the street vendors. It was the smell of home. I had forgotten how much I missed it. My return to the Sterling and Pierce headquarters in Chicago had been seamless, almost anticlimactic. Ray Sterling had called ahead, of course, singing my praises and ensuring my old corner office was waiting for me, clean and ready. In a week, I was back in action, arguing cases in court, mentoring junior associates, and doing what I did best, winning. The story of my New York divorce had preceded me, of course. It had been juicy gossip in the Midwestern legal community for weeks. But here it was, just that, a story. A dramatic chapter in the life of a brilliant litigator who had taken a brief detour. It didn't define me. It was just a footnote. Tonight, however, I wasn't in a courtroom. I was at the Art Institute of Chicago for the annual Lawyers for Education Foundation charity gala. I was on the committee, and my job was to schmooze the donors, many of whom were former clients or rival attorneys. I was good at it. I was wearing an elegant emerald green gown that hugged my curves, and a smile that was equal parts professional and enigmatic. I was deep in conversation with a state Supreme Court justice, discussing a recent ruling on intellectual property law. When I saw him, he was across the room, standing next to a sculpture, looking like he'd walked into the wrong party. He was alone, and it was undeniably Grayson Sullivan. My first instinct was to turn around to ignore him, but that wasn't my style. I had spent too many years being the one who looked away. I excused myself from the justice with a polite smile and wove my way through the crowd toward him. He saw me approaching. His face, which had been slack with boredom, tightened into a mask of his old, familiar arrogance. But I saw the cracks. The lines around his eyes were deeper. The skin on his neck was loose. He had lost weight, and not in a good way. He looked like a man who had been put through the spin cycle of a washing machine. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a bad imitation of his old, confident tone. He raised a glass of what looked like cheap, sparkling wine. "What a coincidence, seeing you here." "Grayson," I replied, my voice cold and steady. "I didn't know you were in Chicago." "I'm not," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "Just visiting on business." The word sounded hollow coming from his lips. I wondered what kind of business a disgraced, unemployed tech CEO could possibly have in Chicago. The silence in the massive Kensington mansion was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of an antique grandfather clock. I unzipped my suitcase on the soft carpet of the walk-in closet and began folding my clothes inside one piece after another. I was 8 months pregnant, my belly heavy and uncomfortable, and bending down was a struggle. Still, I moved slowly, with deliberate precision, not making a single unnecessary sound. Downstairs in the living room, Alexander Kensington had just left. He had a business dinner tonight. Before leaving, he didn't even look at me. "Ma'am, are you going somewhere?" Martha, the housekeeper, walked in holding a mug of warm milk with honey. Seeing the suitcase on the floor, she froze. Without looking up, Grace said quietly, "Martha, please leave. I want to be alone." Martha hesitated, placed the mug on the side table, and quietly walked out. Once she was gone, Grace slowly lifted her head and stared at her reflection in the vanity mirror. Her swollen face, dull skin, a simple maternity dress that made her look more like a servant than anything else. Was this really the wife of tech billionaire Alexander Kensington? No. She was nothing more than the replacement Alexander had found for Vanessa Sinclair. Grace remembered what had happened just that afternoon. She was packing her hospital bag. She was only a month away from her due date, so she needed to have everything ready. In the storage closet of his home office, there was an elegant box. Thinking it contained baby clothes they'd received, she opened it. But instead of baby clothes, she found a black moleskin notebook. The notebook was old, its corners worn, but it had clearly been cherished. It was obvious it was opened frequently. Grace flipped to the first page. Written in elegant cursive were the words, "Vanessa, today is September 1st, 2012, the day I met you." Her hands paused. Vanessa, Alexander's first love. The woman who had married a foreign tech billionaire and now lived overseas. She turned the page. Page 2. Vanessa loves vanilla lattes. Page 3. Vanessa is terrified of thunderstorms. Whenever it rains, she hides in my arms. Page 4. Vanessa says the scent of lavender calms her, so I bought the entire line of hand creams from her favorite brand. Page 5. When Vanessa cries, the tip of her nose turns red. It's adorable. Page 6. Today, Vanessa asked me what would happen if we broke up. I told her that would never happen. She smiled, but it looked forced. Page 7, page 8, 12 pages in total. Grace turned them one by one, and with every page, her fingers grew colder. She had always known there was someone else in Alexander's heart. On their wedding night, he had drank too much. He grabbed her hand in his drunken stupor and called her Vanessa. She didn't make a scene. She just gently pulled her hand away and said, "You've had too much to drink." During 3 years of marriage, Alexander had barely touched her. Only when Grandma Kensington began relentlessly pressuring him for an heir did he reluctantly fulfill his marital duties, just once, and she got pregnant. After that, Alexander went back to his old self. He left early, came home late, and barely spoke to her. He even had his driver take her to her OB/GYN appointments. Grace had always told herself this was normal. High society marriages were built on mutual respect and convenient benefits. But today, seeing that notebook, she understood something profound. He was capable of loving someone with intensity. He just didn't love her. He had poured all his tenderness into that notebook, saving it for a woman who would never return. And who was she? Her name didn't appear on a single page. Grace closed the notebook and put it back exactly where she'd found it. Holding her lower back, she stood up, walked out of the office, and returned to the master suite. Then she opened the suitcase. She wasn't packing a hospital bag. She was packing to leave that house forever. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend Lily. "Grace, are you absolutely sure I already bought the ticket? Your flight to Chicago leaves tomorrow at 10 a.m. Grace replied quickly, "I'm leaving tonight." Lily sent a question mark. "I can't stay here another hour," Grace replied. She turned off her phone and started packing faster. She only took a few simple favorite items of clothing. From her jewelry box, she pulled out the massive diamond engagement ring Alexander had given her and carefully set it on the vanity. It belonged to the Kensington family. She wouldn't take it. She only took the personal savings she'd managed to set aside over the last 3 years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to start over in another city. Grace zipped up the suitcase and rolled it out into the hallway. Martha appeared again, her face etched with worry. "Ma'am, where are you going? Does Mr. Kensington know?" Grace smiled. It was a light, distant smile. "Martha, do me a favor. Give him a message for me." "What message?" the housekeeper asked nervously. "Tell him he no longer needs to hide that notebook in his office." All the color drained from Martha's face. Seeing her guilty expression, Grace understood everything. Martha knew. Everyone in that house knew. The Nessa's ghost lived in that mansion, and Grace, the supposed lady of the house, was the only one kept in the dark. She didn't say another word. She grabbed her suitcase and headed down the stairs. Her low heels clicked against the imported marble floors. Every step was firm. She didn't look back. Downstairs, George, the estate manager, hurried over. "Mrs. Kensington, are you? Order me an Uber, please." Grace cut him off. Ray returned with his own glass and stood beside me. His presence was a comfortable silence. He didn't need to ask what I was looking at. He knew. "You handled it well," he finally said. "Better than I would have." "I've had a lot of practice," I said, my voice free of bitterness. It was simply a statement of fact. With him with his father, with that whole sordid mess, I finally took a sip of the champagne. It was dry, crisp, and absolutely delicious. A world apart from the cloying swill Grayson had been drinking. Grayson reached the double doors of the gallery. He stopped looking back one last time. His eyes met mine across the crowded room. For a brief second, the mask dropped. The arrogance, the resentment, the bravado, it all vanished, revealing the frightened, hollow man underneath. He looked like an abandoned child at a bus station, alone, confused, terrified. Then he turned and was swallowed by the darkness of the Chicago night. "He's someone else's problem now," Ray said quietly. "Yes," I agreed. "He is." That was the most liberating feeling of all. Grayson Sullivan was no longer a force in my life. He was a memory, a warning, a closed case. The rest of the night passed in a blur of speeches, auctions, and superficial conversations. I was named Benefactor of the Year for my contributions to the literacy program, a title I accepted with a gracious smile and a humble speech thanking my wonderful colleagues at Sterling and Pierce. I didn't mention the real reason I had thrown myself into charity work, the need to fill the sudden, massive void in my life with something meaningful, something that helped people instead of hurting them. When Ray and I finally left the gallery, the city was quiet. Cabs were scarce. Buses ran on reduced schedules. The air was crisp and clean, washing away the smell of stale perfume and champagne. Ray's driver was waiting, a sleek black Mercedes, idling by the curb. He opened the door, and we slid into the cool, leather-scented interior. "Home, James," Ray said with a soft chuckle. As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window at the sleeping city. The skyscrapers of the Loop were a necklace of brilliant lights. It was a sight I had taken for granted for years, and one I was now deeply grateful to have back. "Eleanor," Ray said, breaking the comfortable silence. He was looking at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the car. "I've been thinking." "Oh." I turned to him, my guard instinctively going up. Ray was my friend, my mentor, but he was also a man. And men, in my experience, eventually wanted something. "I've been thinking," he continued, "that you've been back for 6 months. You've settled in beautifully. You're taking on the big cases again. You're happy." "I am," I said, a note of caution in my voice. "But you're also alone," he said, his words gentle but direct. "And I don't think you were meant to be alone." My heart skipped a beat. This was the question I had dreaded and anticipated since I got back. "I'm not looking for a replacement Ray," I said, my voice steady. "No, of course not. I'm not offering a replacement," he said, covering my hand with his on the seat between us. His touch was warm, comforting. "I'm offering a partnership, in every sense of the word. Professional, certainly, but maybe personal too." He turned my hand palm up and traced a slow circle on my skin with his thumb. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was patient. It was respectful. It was everything Grayson's touch had never been. "I don't know what that would look like," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "Neither do I," Ray confessed. "But I'd like to find out together. No pressure, no expectations. Just dinner. Next Tuesday at my place. I make an incredible seafood risotto." I looked at him, really looked at him. His kind eyes, his intelligent brow, the little dimple in his chin when he smiled. He was a good man, a decent man, a man who had seen me at my absolute worst and still wanted to be part of my life. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a grand, sweeping passion. It was something much more valuable. It was real. It was solid. It was a foundation to build a future on, not a fantasy to hide inside. I turned my hand and intertwined my fingers with his. It felt right, natural, like coming home. "Tuesday sounds perfect," I said. The smile that lit up his face was brighter than all the chandeliers in the gallery. He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a long, lingering kiss to my knuckles. The car slowed, pulling up to the curb outside my building, a modern, glass-fronted high-rise in River North overlooking the city. My new home. My sanctuary. Ray didn't try to kiss me goodbye. He just squeezed my hand and let go. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Ray, I said. For the first time in a very long time, those words carried no trace of irony or sadness. They were simply a wish for peace. I got out of the car and walked into my building, the doorman cheerfully wishing me a good night. I rode the elevator up to the penthouse. The silence was a welcome balm after the noise of the gala. I unlocked the door and stepped into my apartment. It was dark, quiet, and smelled faintly of the lavender diffuser I kept by the entryway. I kicked off my heels, unzipped the emerald green gown, and let it fall to the floor like a discarded jewel. I stood there in my slip, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. I thought of Grayson, alone in some hotel room in this massive city, drinking his cheap, sparkling wine and his broken dreams. I felt no malice, no triumph, just a profound sense of closure. The $50,000 bill was paid, the wedding was over, the marriage was dead, and I, Eleanor Black, was finally, truly free. I walked over to my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new folder. I named it Future Cases. Then I shut down the computer and walked into my bedroom, shedding the last vestiges of the woman I had been, and slipping between the crisp, cool sheets as the woman I was yet to become. The last laugh wasn't a sound, it was a feeling, a deep, quiet, and enduring sense of peace.